Have you ever noticed when a man becomes most invisible? It's not when he's poor, quiet, or even unloved. No, it's when he stops asking the world for permission to be himself. Not seeking approval, not attention, not validation through a woman's eyes. I'm talking about a man who simply is, without applause, without an audience. That's when he vanishes from the eyes of the world and steps into something sacred. That's when he becomes untouchable. Epicurus understood this long ago. He didn't write angry manifestos or rally in the streets. He just left, quietly, while the rest of the world barked for attention like dogs in a cage. He slipped into a garden, into silence, into a life where no woman's emotions dictated his mornings, no rain defined his worth, and no dinner table demanded he smile when he longed to be still. Now look at us, men in a modern world, not surrounded by the ruins of buildings but the ruins of belief. Masculinity? It's a negotiation. Solitude? A diagnosis. Freedom? A red flag. You've been taught that the man who walks alone is broken. That being single means you're unfinished. That if women don't want you, you must not be worth much. But pause for a moment. Who convinced you that your wholeness had to wear heels? Who sold you the idea that your identity only matters when she approves? This isn't your natural state. You weren't born needing validation. That hunger was given to you, conditioned into you, marketed to you as love. A kind of love that asks, how many women desire you? How well do you serve them? How quickly can you become the man she needs? Epicurus would have called it madness. Because the second you need someone else to confirm your worth, you've traded your soul for a smile. Here's the truth they never printed in any textbook. The man who lives without applause is immune to manipulation. The man who embraces silence becomes untouchable. You can't blackmail him with loneliness. And the man who thrives in solitude? He is the most dangerous man alive. Because he cannot be bought. He cannot be baited. He cannot be broken. His peace is not a performance. It's a fortress. Didn't hide from life, he refined it. He didn't run from women, he simply refused to worship them. He didn't seek validation, he pursued freedom. To him, pleasure wasn't the thrill of seduction or the glow of status. It was the absence of chaos. And yet here we are, modern men, kneeling at the altar of affection, praying to be chosen, trading dignity for attention, smiling through pain, hoping it's enough. You buy dinners you can't afford for women who barely notice you. You say, yes, when every part of you screams, no. You pretend you're fine while silently unraveling. All because you're terrified of the one thing Epicurus embraced like a brother, being alone. You fear silence because silence is honest. It doesn't lie, it reveals. It shows you the man hiding beneath the noise. Not the one you post online. Not the one who plays charm like a game. The real man. The one who stares back in the dark, holding unanswered questions, untouched dreams, and untapped power. And that scares you more than any rejection ever could. But that's exactly where the journey begins. Not in her arms, not in their approval, but in stillness. And that's where Epicurus calls you to start, not to escape the world, but to finally meet yourself. So let's lean in. Let's step into a territory most modern men avoid. The idea that your freedom isn't your flaw. Maybe it's your final form. Listen closely. The single man, truly single in mind, not just in relationship status, is not lacking. He's rare. He's the last wild animal who remembers how to breathe without asking permission. He doesn't wonder, what do I bring to the table? He is the table, and the chair, and the house, and the foundation everything else rests upon. But most men never reach that place. They get stuck wandering through the desert of desperation, chasing, sweating beneath the scorching sun of constant need, mistaking mirages for meaning. They date to feel worthy. They marry to feel complete. Then suffer endlessly under expectations they never consciously agreed to. You can see them from across the room, saying, happy wife, happy life, with empty eyes and smiles that don't reach the soul. Domesticated wolves, lions trained to pose for pictures. Epicurus would mourn them, not because they failed, but because they never asked why they were running in the first place. This is where Epicurean thought cuts deep. It's not soft. It's surgical, precise, unforgiving. He never told men to avoid women. He warned them to avoid unnecessary disturbance. If your peace is constantly under siege, by emotional demands, by endless texts, by social pressure and financial entanglement, is that really love? Or is it spiritual warfare? You're not a partner. You're a butler in an invisible palace. Epicurus wrote, "The wealth required by nature is limited and easy to acquire. But the wealth required by vain ideals is infinite." Now read it again, and this time, replace wealth with love. Suddenly, you understand why you're exhausted. You're not tired because you're alone. You're tired because your definition of love demands you amputate your truth just to be seen. So you shrink. You laugh when you want to cry. You say, "I'm fine," while silently breaking. All to fit a frame you didn't build. For someone who might never even remember your favorite color. Here's the tragedy. You've been taught that this kind of sacrifice is noble. That it's what good men do. But in truth, you're a man who tossed his map into the sea, just to hear someone say, "You're going the right way." You're exhausted because you gave someone else the steering wheel of your life. Simply to avoid driving alone. But Epicurus didn't just reject that deal, he exposed it. He lived among his brothers, close friends, deep thinkers, no chaos, just nature, philosophy, fresh food, and unshakable peace. And he found joy, not in excess, not in status but in less. He found stability in solitude. He found purpose in simplicity. And the world called him weird. But maybe, just maybe, the world is sick. So I'll ask you something. Not as a preacher, not as a guru, but as a fellow man. Have you ever truly sat in your own company, without reaching for the nearest escape? Have you ever woken up, brewed your coffee, and instead of wondering who should be lying next to you, asked what still lies within you? Because if you haven't, your singleness isn't your problem, it's your last chance. The moment you stop romanticizing dependency, you begin reclaiming your divinity. And no, that's not spiritual fluff, that's freedom. Thriving, in the Epicurean sense, isn't about surviving with a smile. It isn't dopamine dressed as peace. It's the quiet conquest of your inner chaos. This is where most men stumble, not because they're weak, but because no one ever told them that stillness is a form of strength. You were taught to hustle, to grind, to build empires, to chase victory, but no one taught you how to simply be, especially not without a woman's warmth. You fear being alone because you confuse silence with insignificance. But Epicurus taught the opposite. He said, "A man who fears being alone will fear everything. And when fear becomes your compass, you don't build a life. You build a prison. And the bars? They're made of every yes you whispered when your soul screamed no. Every mask you wore, every truth you buried, just to feel wanted. But liberation begins in solitude. That's where you'll finally find yourself. You don't choose love, you choose to be chosen. That's your first betrayal. You enter relationships not as a king, but as a beggar in a suit. Smiling, flattering, performing, dying a little inside every time she takes too long to text back. You think that's romance? It's not. It's spiritual suicide. And it began long ago. The moment you were rewarded for being agreeable. The moment being nice earned you a pat on the head. The moment you were taught to serve for the possibility of affection. Every classroom, every movie, every dinner table whispered the same poison. To be wanted is to be worthy. You weren't taught to build a kingdom. You were trained to decorate a cage. But Epicurus saw through the noise. He grasped something modern men desperately need to remember. The highest form of life isn't passion, it's peace. And peace? It's impossible when your emotional thermostat is controlled by someone else's moods. So what does that mean for the single man? It means that everything the world labels as lonely, Epicurus called free. Every night you sleep alone. Every weekend you spend in thought. Every quiet meal without applause. None of that is lack. It is liberty. Let's be honest. How many married men do you know who are truly free? Free to think without filtering. Free to speak without checking. Free to walk away if necessary. You see them smiling in photos. Posting quotes about growth. Eating at restaurants. But behind those eyes is a man on emotional parole. One wrong move and the world he's built collapses. Why? Because his foundation was not truth. It was approval. Now, the thriving single man walks another path entirely. He doesn't treat solitude like a waiting room. He treats it like a temple. A place where thought sharpens. Where the soul settles. Where time belongs to no one but himself. He reads to understand, not to impress. He trains to conquer his own weakness, not to attract. He builds because creation is his nature, not for praise. And most dangerous of all? He becomes unbothered. Unbothered by rejection, by trends, by opinions about whether he's emotionally available. He no longer bends. He no longer performs. He no longer waits. In doing so, he becomes invisible to the shallow, and unmistakably visible to those with depth. That, my brother, is thriving. You are not unloved because you're broken. You are unloved because this world no longer rewards sovereignty. It rewards submission, softness, performance. And your refusal to kneel? It terrifies them. So be terrifying. Because the world doesn't need more agreeable men. It needs more sovereign ones. And sovereign men? They are forged in silence. Women were never your enemy. They were your mirror. What you feared wasn't rejection, it was the reflection. The realization that you didn't know who you were without being desired. That your greatness was being auctioned off for crumbs of comfort. That every "I love you" you chased was just a mask to avoid meeting the man inside you. Epicurus saw all of it. He pierced through the illusion with clarity that still echoes today. He knew the world doesn't enslave men with chains, it enslaves them with distractions. Cheap thrills, soft bodies, quick highs, empty promises. You think you're choosing freedom? But really, you're choosing dependency with better lighting. And here's something Epicurus did say. Of all the things that wisdom provides to help one live one's entire life in happiness, the greatest is friendship. Not romance, not passion, friendship. But we replaced friendship with flings, brotherhood with banter, truth with performance. And now? You walk around with a stitched-on grin, pretending you're happy, but only when she texts. Only when you're useful. Only when you're wanted. You've turned your heart into a vending machine. Insert kindness. Insert effort. Insert money. And maybe she gives affection in return. But that's not love. That's commerce. That's negotiation in a poetry costume. And Epicurus? He wouldn't laugh. He'd weep. Not out of mockery, but sorrow. Because you've been sold a fear of singleness like it's a disease. But let me offer you this. What if being single is actually your healing? What if solitude is the only way to finally confront the silence? The ache, the madness you keep trying to outsource to someone else? Maybe, just maybe, that stillness isn't your punishment. It's your rebirth. Let me ask you something deeper. Do you think Marcus Aurelius wrote meditations over candlelit dinners? Do you believe Da Vinci painted his masterpieces while replying to texts? Do you think Epicurus found peace while arguing about where to eat? Of course not. They withdrew. They unplugged. Not because they hated people, but because they understood something modern men have forgotten. Greatness requires stillness, and stillness cannot grow in a home built on emotional chaos. So ask yourself honestly, have you ever truly chosen solitude? Or have you merely waited for the next woman to rescue you? Because unless your singleness is deliberate, it isn't solitude, it's loneliness in disguise. But the man who chooses it, the man who is single emotionally, intellectually, and spiritually, becomes a volcano of potential. He no longer needs validation, because he has replaced external approval with internal order. His days are not dictated by her moods, they are sculpted by his own intentions. And when he finally does love, if he ever does, he loves from fullness. Not famine. From overflow. Not emptiness. From truth. Not thirst. But first, he must earn the right to be whole. And that, my brother, is the step most men avoid. Let's address the lie that has broken more men than poverty ever could. The lie of usefulness. You think you're thriving because you're helpful. Because you're needed. Because she leans on you when she's sad. Because she calls you at midnight, vents for hours, and says, "I don't know what I'd do without you." But here's a hard truth. Usefulness is not love, it is employment. And the moment your worth depends on your utility, you stop being a partner. You become a tool, replaceable, predictable, disposable. Epicurus taught a timeless truth. Peace begins when need ends. Not only physical needs like food or shelter, but ego needs. 2. Validation. Affirmation. That addictive hit of approval. Modern romance isn't love. It's an ego contract. You boost her confidence. She soothes your insecurity. You pick up the check. She offers affection. You say yes when you want to scream no. She says maybe when she means never. And together, you both pretend, calling it love. But it's not. It's polite warfare. That's why the man who thrives in singleness isn't defeated. He's free. He didn't leave the battlefield because he lost. He left because he saw the truth. The war itself was the trap. Epicurus walked away from the city, from politics, from status games, from applause, not because he lacked ambition, but because he understood that freedom isn't earned through conquest. It's earned through withdrawal. And here's what that means for you. If your identity still depends on others to exist, if your peace hinges on whether or not she still loves you today, then you are not free. You're breathing on borrowed oxygen. You're not lonely, you're just unfamiliar with yourself. And this is where singleness becomes sacred. Not as a sad pause before marriage, but as the only place where you meet yourself, raw, unfiltered, unmasked. No flowers to buy, no pictures to post, no games to play. Just you, breathing, unwatched, unapplauded, unapologetically alone. Now ask yourself, can you handle that? Can you sit in a room, disconnected from performance, and still feel significant? Most men can't. They sprint back to dating apps, to small talk, to flirting, to noise, because without it, they feel like ghosts. But not you. Not if you walk the Epicurean path. That path, though quiet, is brutally honest. It asks questions that strip you down. What do you do when no one's there to impress? What do you believe when there's no one around to agree? Who are you when she's not watching? The answers to those questions, that's your real character. Epicurus didn't build temples. He built gardens. Quiet places where thinking replaced chasing, where wisdom replaced lust, and where truth replaced noise. His people weren't lovers in crisis. They were thinkers in communion. Friends, not followers. Conversation, not confession. And here's the deeper truth. The man who thrives in singleness doesn't isolate, he refines. He doesn't reject connection, he elevates it. He chooses who enters his space, not from arrogance, but sacred discipline. Because when your peace becomes priceless, you stop selling it cheap. Modern men are broke, not in wallets, but in will. They trade their energy for flirtation, their dreams for comfort, their fire for the illusion of emotional safety. But the single man who thrives, he spends his time like gold, guards his mind like a fortress, plants thoughts like seeds, and waters them with silence. Soon, the world begins to look at him, confused. How is he so calm? So grounded? So untouchable? What's his secret? They forget something crucial. He had the courage to walk alone long enough to become whole. Most men go to their graves with their best songs unsung, their gifts unopened, their silence unmastered, not because they were lazy, but because they were distracted. Distracted by the myth that a woman's love would complete them, that someone else's arms could fix what was broken in childhood, that if they served hard enough, they'd finally be enough. But Epicurus would look you in the eyes and ask, who told you that you were broken in the first place? The world tells you to find the one. Epicurus tells you to find your center. The world gives you checklists, marriage, mortgage, maternity shoots. Epicurus gives you a blank page and says, write what matters. Here's the final, brutal truth. You were always enough. Alone. Still, many men will hear this and return to the cage. Why? Because comfort feels safer than clarity. Because they believe devotion is virtue, even when it erases them. Because they would rather be wanted than wise. And that's not just a personal loss, it's a generational tragedy. Sons will see fathers beg. Brothers will mimic brokenness. Entire lineages will forget the sound of power. But you, listening to this, have a choice. You can keep building your identity around her emotions. Or, you can begin the sacred work of becoming unshakable. You can keep asking, what do women want? Or finally ask, what was I created to be? Not in theory, in practice. With solitude, with fire, with discipline. Because the man who thrives in singleness isn't rejecting romance. He's rejecting dependency. He refuses to rent his soul for scraps of attention. He chooses stillness over chaos, autonomy over applause, self-respect over self-erasure. And when, if, love ever finds him, it won't be to fill a hole, but to share a garden. Not to rescue him, but to walk beside him, whole. Until that day, water your mind, guard your time, master your silence, and never apologize for being alone. In the kingdom of Epicurus, the man who walks alone walks the furthest. If this message moved you, act, like, share, subscribe, Support this channel through the link below. Not for noise, but for truth. Be that strength. Be that man. Walk forward, unshaken.